Okay, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. I'm your host, Pedro Laveria, and the name of today's episode is The UF Government Established Communications with Aliens. I put that as a question mark because I don't know what the answer to that is. Um, that's certainly a claim that was made recently by Dr. Jacques Vallee on the Weaponized podcast. And when Jacques Vallee speaks, people listen. And the reason why is because he is one of the most minimalist and perhaps grounded researchers in the UFO field and has been for, 60 years. He does the, boots on the ground, go to the location, interview the witnesses type of work. He's big on traces and studying traces in lab of any, so-called encounters or landings. Um, and he is an alumni of OSAP, right, which was the DIA UFO program. He created a Capella for them, which is the world's largest database of UFO sightings and contact in the world. And it has, an AI that allows them to look for patterns and that sort of thing. So, Valet has always been one of the more grounded, scientific, methodological, and skeptical UFO researchers, um, and has furthered the field more than most. So when he says something, people listen. So let's hear what he has to say about the bizarre claim in the title of this video on the Weaponized podcast.
The entities. Those are not the entities that are described at Trinity in in my book uh, with Paula Harris. They are not the entities that were caught in Brazil that are in that documentary. Um, they are they may be the controllers, they may be the higher level entity. They, if what I'm told is true, the communication with them is very sophisticated and it's complex. So there may be a group that I would, but it could be open or closed depending on the conditions. He said, I think UFOs may be the same thing. They may be open to some people under certain conditions that they control. They certainly have spoken to people who were confronted with entities that were open to discussion. Um, there are cases that I know where there were this happened in government facilities, but nobody's talking about that. So I suspect that that's true based on the people I've met, but they were not the people who were running the program. So I cannot be completely sure. But what they described to me is a very sophisticated process by which we may be able to interact with the entities. Those are not the entities that are described at Trinity in my book uh, with Paula Harris. They are not the entities that were caught in Brazil that are in that documentary. Um, they are they may be the controllers, they may be the higher level entity. They, if what I'm told is true, the communication with them is very sophisticated and it's complex. So there may be a group that I would respect that has access to that. And this was from years ago, by the way. I mean, that report of that that particular interaction was more than 20 years in a lab somewhere in controlled conditions. If that's true, then there is a process ongoing where we may be able to acquire information at a very sophisticated level, and that would be, that could be a reason for stalling quote disclosure until there can be a rational way that we're not confronted with something so overpowering that it would destroy our culture and our society. I mean, we have enough to deal with AI these days, which is, a foreign entity potentially. Um,
But so you're saying you've been made aware that there is a government project, maybe it was 20 years ago, that was able to establish direct communication with a non-human intelligence, and that you believe this information to be true, and that this is a reality. This is what you understand to be true. Is that correct?
um, I cannot tell. Yes, yes, it's factual. What I cannot tell is whether that the entity that was presented was a simulation of a real entity or whether it was the real entity. Okay. The people I spoke to couldn't probe it to see if it was made of flesh or in metal or something else. Okay. But it was presented to them in a secure facility that I've never heard of anywhere else where there was structured interaction with it on a continuing basis by specialists from different areas. The person I spoke to was an extreme, specialist in a particular discipline, uh, and not a casual observer.
And so that could be kind of one of the reasons we have to be careful, or there's a slow rollout of disclosure, because you're saying we might already have communication with
We
some
may have
non.
forms of communication or ways to engineer communication at a sophisticated level.
Okay, so there's a lot of vagary there, understandably so. But basically, there's some form of communication and it's sophisticated, but something presented itself and they weren't able to like probe it and test it in any way. So there was a visual phenomenon, maybe auditory phenomenon, who knows? And it happened in a lab. Okay. Now, let's go back to the Kona Blue documents because I think the Kona Blue documents may be able to shed light on what this kind of communication, if it's happening, might look like. Okay. So, Kona Blue. I always go back to this slide, the consciousness center, right? It was about remote viewing, remote communication, and experiments to determine baseline parameters for physical transport across dimensional slash space-time barrier. Okay. What are these things? We went over that in our last episode. Okay. Remote viewing, we know what remote viewing is. There's a bunch of stuff on it on CIA FOIA. Basically, it's a protocol for clairvoyance, right? It's a scientific protocol for clairvoyance. And so someone can close their eyes and see what's happening on the other side of the world. But again, this has to be a double blind test. The seer cannot know what the target is ahead of time. And there has to be feedback. So whatever the seer produces, there has to be some kind of confirmation to see if he got it right or if he got it wrong. And the seer, the remote viewer, has to receive the feedback. So that's part of their continuing education. If they got it right, their confidence will increase. If they got it wrong, they have to ask themselves why. Um, Perhaps it's some misinterpretation of some kind of impression they had. It's all part of their continuing education. Okay, so remote viewing is a scientific protocol um, for clairvoyance. Okay, to make sure everything is honest and factual. Okay. Remote communication, we went over that. Okay, you can go look up this doc on CIA FOIA, and remote communication is telepathy. Okay, you don't believe that doc, you can look at this doc on CIA FOIA. Yep, remote communication is mental telepathy. Okay, so we have remote viewing, we have remote communication. Viewing of what? Communication with who, right? Remember, Kona Blue was supposed to be the continuation of OSAP. Um, it was supposed to be a special access program. So whereas OSAP was a classified program, this was going to be, you know, top secret program. Okay. And part of that involved receiving hardware from crash retrievals from Lockheed Martin, okay, of non-human intelligence. But you know, this slide with regarding the consciousness center is very pertinent with regards to this claim by Vallee about any kind of communication. Now, Eric Davis's paper, when he talks about teleportation, he has a bunch of, you know, he has sections that are dedicated to just straight up, you know, standard physics, right? Wormholes and, you know, quantum mechanics and all that kind of stuff, parallel universes, perhaps. But then there's a section on psychokinetic teleportation, right? Um, and you can read it here. You can pause and read for yourself, or you can just find this document online. But he talks about Chinese parapsychology and the experiments that were done regarding some kind of psychically mediated teleportation of small objects. Okay. CIA FOIA has translations of those documents. You can look them up. It's very interesting. But why am I bringing this up? Because there are two there are two cases, and the first one we're going to go over is talked about by Annie Jacobsen in her book Phenomenon. It's also talked about in God's Man in War. Um, and what I did was I used an AI to put the two versions together while eliminating the redundancies. So some of what you're going to see in the slide sounds like Annie Jacobsen. Some of it's going to sound like Peter Levenda because it is. But basically, something happened in the 1940s, right? Yeah, Andrea Puharich, who was a parapsychologist, and one of his associates was working with some Hindu scholar who went into a deep meditative trance and appeared to channel uh, some non-human intelligence. Okay, some non-human intelligence apparently was speaking through him. Right? They took a bunch of notes. And it wasn't just one non-human intelligence, it was nine of them, right? It was these nine non-human intelligences talking through this Hindu scholar who was in town, right? And Puharich was very impressed by this, and so he got some of his wealthy backers together, and they did another one. This time, the non-humans through this channeler were talking about ESP, psychokinesis, teleportation, alchemy, Einstein, Jesus, atomic weapons, cosmic rays. Um, and one of the attendants, Marcelo DuPont, admitted to having attended one of these seances. And apparently, this is uh, information that's available at the Library of Congress. Okay. But you know, 6 months after the first seance, they got nine people together and they had another seance. And this time there was one of the aliens or non-humans called R saying that tonight we want to create Brahmins in this world. So if you don't know what a Brahmin is, in the Hindu caste system, you have the Brahmins on top, they're the priests, right? Then you have the Kshatras, which are the warrior class, and then you have, below them, merchants, farmers, and at the bottom you have untouchables. Um, but the Brahmins are the highest caste, right? They're the most elite, and they're the ones that are, in some sense, in contact with the divine, right? Because they're the priests. And so these non-humans are talking through this, channeler saying, "Hey, tonight we're gonna make new Brahmins, and you are the new Brahmins." And one of the things that happened was an apport. So apparently, cotton strings materialized out of thin air, and this was kind of like proof of that what they were experiencing was real. Okay. And if you look at who attended the seance, you have people who are connected to Hollywood, intelligence, the New Age, the military. You have a DuPont, an Astor, and a Forbes. These aren't nobodies. And it's a very interesting scene. I wish I was there. Okay. But with the exception of the remote viewing, in this anecdote from Jacobson and Lavenda, we have two of these three things, right? You have remote communication in the form of channeling, and then you also have these apports, right? These cotton strings coming out of nowhere, which might be interpreted as a form of physical transport again across dimensional slash space-time barrier, right? Where did these cotton strings come from, right? That they just appeared out of nowhere in the middle of this seance. Okay. So my theory is that with regards to Kona Blue, the remote viewing, remote communication, and these kind of psychic teleportation experiments they wanted to do was all about communication. So this is a theory. I can't prove it. I can't prove it. I have no access to top secret files. I only have access to what's out in the public domain. I have no knowledge of the program Vallee was talking about other than what he himself said. But if there was some kind of communication protocol with a non-human intelligence, this would be how you do it, right? Remote communication, say telepathy, right? Remote viewing, clairvoyance. Remote viewing requires feedback. So it would stand to reason that if remote communication is real, there is a protocol, a scientific protocol to facilitate telepathy and to ensure its correctness that would be similar to the remote viewing protocols. And if that's the case, then this remote communication protocol would require some kind of feedback. You'd have to know whether or not you got it right vis-a-vis your telepathic communication. And the only way you can do that is non-telepathically, right? So, with remote viewing, you need photos. With remote communication, you would need some kind of object to show you got it right. So maybe remote communication and this, let's say remote teleportation or psychic teleportation or psychokinetic teleportation they wanted to do is how that happens, right? So maybe they're in contact with the aliens, let's say, using a remote communication, and in order to make sure they got it right or wrong, people on the other end of the line, so to speak, have to send something, right? And maybe that's how this is happening. And if that's the case, if this picture I'm painting is correct, that is a very sophisticated and delicate process. It would have to be, right? So I'm not just going to stop there. I'm going to show you another example from the documentary 1974 called UFOs Are Real. Okay, or UFOs It Has Begun. Okay. And it's the testimony of Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend, who is an alumni of the Project Blue Book. So let's listen to what Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend has to say.
This man is retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend, U.S. Air Force, and former head of Project Blue Book. Friend, now on the management staff of Celesco Industries Incorporated, which builds and launches missiles for defense testing purposes. Friend now relates this most unusual experience.
It was 1959 when I was invited to attend a briefing in the security portion of this building. It seems a retired Rear Admiral had information about a woman in Upper Maine that purported to have established contact with extraterrestrial beings. 2 naval intelligence officers were sent to investigate. The naval officers met with the woman, and she went into a trance, supposedly to establish contact with the purported extraterrestrials. And then they asked her scientific and technical questions that a woman of her education could not possibly know the answers to. Yet, as the questions were put to her, she was able to answer easily with seeming telepathic help from these purported extraterrestrials. According to the report, she indicated there was an organization, OEEV, which meant Universal Association of Planets, and that organization had a project, UNZA, meaning Earth, which was being conducted. Then an unexpected turn took place. One of the naval officers was informed by the woman that they, the extraterrestrials, were willing to answer questions directly through him, a naval commander and intelligence officer with no prior experience in telepathic communication. He took over and attempted to write down the answers to questions put to him by his fellow naval officer.
The word traveled back quickly to Washington officials and the very skeptical CIA. Nevertheless, there was no reason to totally disbelieve the report of this highly respected Navy commander.
Questions were put to him, such as, do you favor the government, religious group, or race? And would there be a third world war? The answer to both was no. The group then asked if they could see a spaceship, and the commander, still in a trance, told them to go to the window and they would have proof. The group moved to the window where they supposedly observed a UFO. I was told that a call was made for radar confirmation. The reply came back that that particular quadrant of the area was blanked out on radar at the time. After being briefed on all of the details, I asked the commander if he would attempt to contact me. He sat for several minutes and then appeared in a deep trance with his Adam's apple moving up and down rapidly. Questions were put to him, and he answered them by printing in rather large letters using rapid but jerky motions. It wasn't at all like his natural hand. During the course of the questioning, we learned the names of some of the so-called extraterrestrials. One was Krill, C-R-L-L-L. Another, Alomar, A-L-O-M-A-R. And another, Alpha, A-F-F-A, purportedly from the planet Uranus.
Okay, so why do I give you these 2 cases, right? You have the AFA affair, and you have this this thing, this seance going on with these rich people and a parapsychologist. The reason I bring these up, okay, and again, I gotta credit, Annie Jacobson and Peter Lavenda for the whole Roundtable Foundation case, and of course UFOs It Has Begun. The reason I use these 2 examples is because in both cases you had remote communication and feedback, right? So in the whole affair with AFA, you had this remote communication with the woman who was a channeler at first, and then they saw a UFO. So that's the feedback. Seeing the UFO is the feedback, right? And in the case with this weird Hindu channeler guy, you have the remote communication, with something that's supposedly in a spaceship orbiting the Earth, But then you have the feedback of the apport, right? The cotton strings just, coming out of nowhere, right? And I think that, um, if what the Consciousness Center at Kona Blue wanted to do was remote viewing, remote communication, and psychic teleportation, let's say, then that sounds like a protocol for communicating with the non-human intelligence, right? Because the remote communication facilitate the communication, but then the apports would act as feedback, right? And then, very tangible, concrete feedback. And yeah, so that's my theory. So I don't know if, what Jacques Vallee was told is true. He's almost certainly telling the truth, but I don't know if what he was told is true. But if it is true, then I think the Kona Blue slides coupled with these two cases, the Roundtable Foundation seance and the AFA affair, might shed some light on later and perhaps current communication protocols, which may or may not exist. Okay. They would involve remote viewing, remote communication, and some kind of macro psychokinetic teleportation of small objects. Okay. Take it for what it's worth. It's a theory, nothing more. Um, this is one big hall of mirrors. And that's why I want to focus more on consciousness and parapsychology and that sort of thing. So, until next time, remember your consciousness is not classified. Learn how to meditate, learn how to do remote viewing, figure it out, play with it. Just don't break the law or hurt yourself.